Okay, and I want to talk just about the principle of community as a unit of identity and community engagement in the work setting. Sorry, it's community engagement as a unit of identity. So what does identity mean? And then the example I'm going to talk about is a particular work setting example of a study that I was part of. What do we mean, and I think the crucial issue is what do we mean by identity? When you're working with one person, who they are becomes, is their identity. If I'm working with Chanel, I'll know who I'm working with, and you've got an identity and a person, a medical doctor, interest in community based. So we get to know each other and we can work together. But when you're working with a community, it becomes a more diffuse issue. And you need to understand who you're working with. And identity is really how a community defines itself. And that's not a static definition. Now, as I'm sure you define yourself by mood or who you're with, etc., you might see yourself differently. So identity is how a community defines itself, and being able to understand this is really crucial when you're starting to work with and enter a community. And work sites generally present multiple identities. And your work site is one particular set of communities that I'll talk about here, but if you're working in Delft, for example, as a community setting, working in the community ones and working with the Sabine owners, they've got a particular identity. Working with the TIC smokers, they've got a different identity. And it comes out in the way they talk about themselves, how they see themselves in relation to others. So work sites generally have multiple identities, and these often contradict each other due to the structured nature of a specific identity, specific community. So work site, in most work sites of large size, you'll find there's a difference between management level, workers level, middle management, owners. In this case, the study that I'll be talking about now is the Cape Town City Council, so there's no real owners, but there's the elected people that are elected, there's those that in the senior functional roles, down to the people who collect the trash or sweep the streets. Now, identity and capacity for collective action so this identity and the capacity for action can be affected by multiple issues. And the capacity for collective action. So if there's a lot of variation by race, by age, by gender, by education, culture, religion, all of these count as issues for intervention and issues of division or unification. It's much harder to organize a combined meeting of Christians and Muslims during Ramadan. And you then sit with the problem of do you provide refreshments during Ramadan? With one part of the community want them, but another part will find it offensive. So these are all aspects that you have to take into account. When you put workers and management together, how are they going to interact? Who will dominate? Will workers feel comfortable even talking in front of managers? And by contradiction, will the managers feel comfortable exposing aspects of themselves amongst those who aren't who answer to them? And South Africa, as in any other country, also have to take on particular dynamics. And the history of racism in South Africa has got very particular functions. And the worksite class and personal aspirations also have to be considered, with people who want to see themselves as moving up. So if we want to move up the hierarchy in a worksite and they're dealing with somebody who's above them, it can be harder for them to be open. So identity in the worksite, you have a corporate identity which relates to the product, the industry, area of work. This is the public image that's put out. People and who they are really the focus, but it's the people there that are really the focus. And again, there's no universal identity. So when you go into a work site, you're not dealing with the product and manufacturer, you're dealing with the people who are there, although that will be influenced by it. And who you talk to at any point will change the identity to some degree. And then when you're working in multiple work sites or in a site or in an area where there are multiple different groupings, and in City Council we found this. Because on the one hand you have the bureaucrats who sit in Civic Centre. On the other level, we were running workshops in a place just next to the Crossroads where the garbage collectors move from, and where they meet in the mornings and afternoons, before and after shifts. And these are as different work sites as you could imagine. There's a formal workforce in a large company, the owners, the shareholders, board of directors. So this is kind of the different levels that you would deal with. Owners, senior functional management, line management, including those at decentralized branches, the workers. Then you get the staff service structures, the wellness groups, the health services within the worksite, those that do education within the worksite, training. You get the influence of unions, other employee organizations, and there can be multiple employee organizations. You'll sometimes find prayer groups inside a worksite. You might find a women's group inside a worksite. So these are multiple identities, all with particular interests, and they're often contradictory. And it's just trying to find out what is a core identity issue within this. And no matter what intervention you're going into, it's going to have, as I said, the sex workers and the discussion we had first. The different areas where they work means that they've got different needs and different aspirations. And it's the same with any process, and you've got to try and work with them. And then with municipal groups, you've got elected officials, middle management, service providers. And these are not necessarily uniform range, because you'll change from the medical doctors who are in the clinics but are employed by the city, to garbage collectors, to people who work in the sewage works, to people who sit and stamp your, to take payments on your electricity, to people who issue car licenses. These are all parts of, and are all service providers. And they're working often in very different places. And some of the office areas are really small. And I think, for example, if I go to the place where for car licensing in Pinelands, it's 3 or 4 staff, versus Civic Centre, which has several thousand staff. And then there's places like, as I said, the refuse collectors, which at some level has about a couple of hundred staff, but they spend virtually no time there. All their time is out on the streets. And again, it's a good example within the municipal service, there are multiple unions. There's at least 2 or 3 unions at the workers' levels, and then amongst the senior employees there's a different structure that they organise around. And then the top level will organise around a political party, or around, and the higher echelons of a political party, in this case the Democratic Alliance in Cape Town, or around other professional groups. And then as you go down to smaller sizes, it does get slightly less complex. So in the small shop, for example, something like a local nursery or a local supermarket. Actually, a local supermarket is interesting because on the one hand you've got the organisation that happens there, and you've got the corporate structure. But if you get an independent shop, it might have 4 or 5 staff. It's a much simpler structure, but it's a much less effective area to go and try to start organising. And what they're looking for varies. The owner may, a small company, the owner will also be doing functional management, won't just be the owner. They're informal work sites. They're very small work sites, merged contexts where there are multiple. So if you sit in at stallholders at a market, Now, each one of them operates independently. But there have been a lot of projects that have organised amongst them. And I think the work among sex workers is a good example. If you took along the whole of Main Street, you'd find several hundred sex workers operating. They're all in the same industry, and there are ways of organising them together because their needs are similar. But they would each be an independent operator. The same with market in going to town and Green Market Square. There are about 100 or so stalls there. Each of them is independent, but they will organise as a grouping as well. Independent seasonal workers is another grouping, and there's a lot of migrant workers or seasonal workers that come in. And one of the areas in series they talk about the farmers bring seasonal workers in every year to come and pick fruit, and they stick around for 4 to 5 months and then go back or somewhere else. So all of these are different structures of work site, and each of them has a specific sense of identity, and it's important to, if you're going to start working with them, is to get a sense of what is identity, where you get, and where are you going to access through to start talking to these people. You can also work with organised customers in a business. So working with patients in a clinic, customers in a bank, users of a service, customers at a shebeen. All of these are particular groupings related to a work site. Just to repeat some of the process from last lecture, there are multiple levels of access negotiation. You need to be flexible where you work and who you work with. Be clear of how to work and be strategic. You don't always necessarily go to the top or connect with everybody. When you're doing family work, the project I'm going to talk about a little bit with this lecture is we did a family intervention. So we did a training course for parents, teaching parents how to talk to their adolescent children about sex and HIV. We identified this as a huge gap, and their parents weren't talking or felt unable to talk. And the city council was the main area that we worked in, main employer that we worked in. We accessed them via the wellness program. Now the wellness program is very much a peripheral grouping. It's a service grouping to the rest of the city council. And they gave us our access route in. And they, by and large, set up virtually every meeting we had. We did get some formal approval through the wellness program into the human resources. But every time we tried to go and talk to human resources, it just ended up in this mass confusion as to what was going on, and attempts to try and tie us into a huge bureaucratic process that would have ended up driving us and them mad. And one time in particular that we went through this, we were allocated a person we had to talk to. And this person was in the meeting, she agreed to work with us, and she never took a single call or responded to a single email after that meeting. So we went back to wellness and they just took it over and organized and confirmed the access. So this is, so you don't necessarily always have to go to the top of a grouping. And sometimes you go to the top and they just, literally they sign off with a signature after talking for 5 minutes. So, when we went into Delft and working in Shebeen, met to the elected officials, they listened to us and thought, okay, this is a good idea, I don't have to be involved. It was literally thinking, I'm attributing, projecting onto this, but the sense I had from those meetings was, okay, I don't really want to be involved, but it sounds like this might do our community some good, so they signed off on it on the basis of a 10-minute discussion, and then it would send a staff member to an annual meeting for some feedback, or some of them would. So you need to be clear about where you're going, and this depends on the community that you're working in. So in this case, the wellness facilitated our access, and they facilitated us into areas where they thought we'd be able to work well. They also gave us spaces to work, and we ended up doing a lot of our work in the libraries. So we worked through the civic centre, through the municipality, and then they facilitated our access into different places. They facilitated our access into, and they also gave us some of their volunteers or staff for us to train as trainers. So we wouldn't go into work sites and train the parents directly. We trained staff. So we also would leave something behind. And we all left all of them with a full manual of how to do the work. But once again, one of the issues of City Council was they had multiple work sites spread over the whole of the Western Cape, whole of Cape Town rather. And there must be about 200 to 300 different sites. Actually more, probably in the thousands of sites. You take it that almost every community has a library, one or two other services. Yeah, it was just, that's literally the extent. Even had 3 head offices. There's a civic centre in town, there's another one just up the road in Tygerberg, and then 1 or 2 others. So every time we went to a new space, it was talking to them about it, and again getting approval, and sometimes that looping back to some senior person of the City Council, go down to wellness. So it was a constant process of working with these issues in terms of access. But what happened with this was that we identified a community, which is parents of adolescents that wanted to do the study. And we would work through wellness to identify those parents, and that was really the identity of our respondents. And we took on a particular identity as well. And you acknowledge conflicts and constraints, and there were difficulties. The largest work site was City Council Civic Centre. We were told we just wouldn't get respondents there because people wouldn't be happy to talk to one another, and they're too busy rushing from one meeting to another to ever come into a program. Okay, so two cases, the parenting chamber and street-based sex workers. So what we actually did, and where I think this was particularly interesting in terms of participatory work, was that we initially had this tool module, this course that had been developed in the US, but we had to make it appropriate to South Africa. So we wanted to redevelop it. Yeah. So what we tried to do was, okay, we initially were looking at where we were going to do it, and we identified City Council. We also identified a major retailer, and the retailer eventually fell out of the process. Now, okay, the access and negotiation, the different points of authority and conflicts in the system. We had introduction was via a trade union, and that was through a very good friend of mine whose brother is head of the pension scheme for one of the trade unions that work in the system. So that's how we got in. The unit head took the process through to higher management. He thought of something that would give credit or give him credit and make his department grow and more important. And then he coordinated through the heads of the services and the others sections. We did do a similar program in a community setting, and the aim was to take a US program that worked and apply it in a South African setting. And the context was very different, so the content had to be different. But the experts that we had to draw on were community members themselves. So in many cases, in adapting this, we couldn't sit and do it ourselves. We had to reflect who the people were that were going to be receiving this. So the key people were the staff of the City Council and people from this wellness program. And we were given 4 trainers. One, incidentally, was an HIV positive woman who was very open about it and spoke a lot about the issues. The research team of Stellenbosch, Harvard University and City Council Wellness Program. The researchers, so that we went through a phase. The researchers' comments we initially did was the researchers went through the original manual and removed US terms and examples and just left spaces. And then we did individual interviews with parents and adolescents, qualitative interviews, to get their input on key parenting communication issues around HIV and sex. And for example, one of the issues that arose very rapidly was the concerns around substance abuse. And we did we did a workshop, and we did, and I'm a strong advocate of the workshop method and format as a research methodology. The strong tradition of workshops is just a method of organizing in South Africa, but I think it is a strongly viable research tool. We did a workshop which had included the researchers, had 2 or 3 NGOs that did similar work, so groupings like there's a grouping that works with adolescent youth in Athlone area. They run parenting programs, so we brought them in. Some of the RAPCAN came in as a group that works with child abuse, and and then we brought in some leaders from the field. Dr. Eve came to one of the workshops, just in terms of an expert on adolescent sexuality. And then we had the City Council staff. We did bring in some people from industry, the researchers. And there were several issues that arose. And one was language. What language do you do the course in? And we literally fluctuated from doing everything in English to doing mixes of English, Afrikaans and Xhosa, to running separate groups of different language groups. And there were different arguments made at different times. People saying that, no, you can't do things by language group because that would be considered discriminatory and isolationist. Then people wouldn't understand. Going back and forth a long time. And the second issue was the American study had run over 8 lunch hours. One of the first things we informed is South African workers don't have lunch hours. They won't have a fixed lunch hour. They will get between 30 and 45 minutes, but that might vary according to the needs of their bosses and when they want to work. And particularly in the retail area, they're saying there's no way that they would allow it. And we ended up with a similar issue of City Council, so we ended up changing it from 8 one-hour sessions to 6 two-hour sessions that ran at the end of the workday, or at a particular point when we could gather the staff together. In some cases, at the end of the workday, in other cases, we made use of all staff, all companies or employer organizations are obliged to provide staff with additional training. So we made use of that legislation, and this was included as part of the training that the staff would go through. But the idea literally was we went into a workshop, we spoke for about an hour about the project and aims, etc. They got different NGOs to talk about how they did education, and we got the wellness program people to talk about their approach. And from that, we literally built from bare bones a new intervention structure. And after that initial workshop, we came out with a particular tool that we then put through a translation process. There was long discussions about comprehension and discovering more and more complexities, particularly in Xhosa, because there are not specific terms for sexual organs. There are not specific terms necessarily for a lot of sexual behavior. And it's spoken about in metaphor or in description. So we had to start incorporating that. And we did a lot of that by workshop mode as well, with the staff sitting together. Then we did a training of the health staff. So we then had a revised program. We sat with the staff from the city council who were going to do the training. We trained them. And constantly through the 2 or 3 days that we spent with them, training them in the 6 modules, they were coming up with new ideas and changing the program. So already that was, again, remodifying it. A pilot group was run, with just one grouping, just one set of workers. And based on that, and we evaluated that with a survey, observation, discussions with members and facilitators, we again changed the program. At that point, we presented the revised program to a second workshop at NGOs, industry, CETAs. CETAs are state education training authorities, or sector education and training authorities. Now and this is for employee training and employee development. And every sector is meant to have a CETA that looks after that section and trains them and develops and their staff to go to work development. It's a very poorly run grouping structure, but it was set up with very good intention. Hopefully will develop. So we ran a second workshop, and there were further changes in content. So you can imagine this has now gone through multiple processes. And that is why, for me, this, in many respects, it's not a deep participatory project in terms of community having control. It was something where they had where people on the ground had massive input into how the processes looked. And again, when we had requests from management to make the training more flexible, so we had to start looking at, can we run this in 10 short starts versus 6 longer starts, or can we run it in 4 3-hour slots rather than 6 2-hour slots? Again, the training of the council facilitators, and there was further rewriting. We did an experimental trial that worked really well, and we're now battling to get funding to do a larger trial. Yeah, sure, sorry. Okay. Okay. To continue on from where we were, I described the process of going through the development of the parenting training program. There are problems. Still used external evaluation as a final judgment on value. So it was still an external survey and us doing the qualitative interviews. It needs a special office or grouping to run it, although the skills required by the internal trainers are low. No professional qualification is required. It does still require a particular office to run the intervention. And there are differences within the worksite as to who needed to do the program and who felt they should do the program. And it was quite hard getting anybody above, from middle management and up into the program. Those who designated as having value are generally the lower class or the lower levels of staff. Okay, street-based sex workers. I spoke earlier as an example about SWET as a community-based participatory work. But in 2002, the SWET was set up. Sorry, that should be Task Force, not Trust. Set up an outreach program for street workers in Claremont. And the research role was to observe and evaluate how they provided the service. Staff, and they said, so there's an outreach program set up for a specific grouping of sex workers in Claremont. And they were street-based workers who were also homeless and lived in an open patch of land behind the Claremont Library, in the space that they've been evicted now because the space is now a large private and very expensive private hospital. The staff of SWET met with the sex workers from the area who wished to attend to discuss issues and concerns. And it was really one evening a month They met in the Claremont Town Hall, and the group varied from about 7 to about 18 or 19. And the continuous changes in who attended, from the sex workers in the areas, plus some of their pimps or handlers. Key results were, and it was really trying to understand from Sweat's side what these workers needed and what the conditions were in their community, and to give them a space to complain and talk about the issues. Yes. Key results were improving access to condoms and lubricants for safe sex. There's trying to set up protection from violence, from customers, public gangs. And there were cases of customers and public attacking them, and then the gangs would run conflicting or another group of sex workers. They'd run young girls in the community, and they didn't always like the competition, so we tried to push other sex workers off the street. The protection from the police, from arrest, harassment, sexual violence. There was concerns about the influence of gangs, and gangs trying to force the sex workers to operate under their leadership and take profits from them. Getting access to health services, especially concerns around stigma. Also some direct assistance to the sex workers in terms of accessing their children. Many of the sex workers had children, and they'd been left with other family members who were refusing to give the sex workers access to their children, and stigmatized the sex workers. Find them safe places to take their customers. I showed some of the places where they went, and these ranged from back rooms in a sex shop, where customers would go and watch dirty movies on their own, and so sex workers would take them there, or there's a space next to the railway line where there's an indentation in the ground that they put cardboard down. And there's also general support for and advocacy. Some of the big issues that resulted is trust development, and that was important, and that quite a good sense of trust developed between the sex workers and Sweat. And it's interesting because I didn't go to all, but I went to a lot of the meetings, and I got to know some of the workers directly. And they would regularly come up and chat when I was in the area. Sex workers felt listened to. And this particular community of sex workers became a core focus area for Sweat work. And it was a particularly marginalized and difficult grouping because they were extremely poor, they lived on the street, they had huge alcohol dependency and drug dependencies. So I was first introduced to the concept of a pop suck. Pop suck is a 5-litre bag of wine. Some of the change that did happen was better access to condoms, and the Sweat would go around and distribute condoms to make sure they had access to protection. Although most of the sex workers there, I eventually discovered, were HIV positive already. But you're still trying to limit repeat infections and infections from other strains of HIV. They had better access to health services. Advocacy was done to try to limit police violence and to offer protection. And emergency support systems were set up, so there was a space for them to be able to phone lawyers or somebody late at night if they were harassed by police. And it did seem like their biggest threat was from police. Considerations for working customers in small-scale drinking venues. This is the Shebeen study. Okay. Yeah, this is really, in terms of planning, we did this work we did this 5-year project, working in the Shebeens and drinking venues in Delft, and really trying to look towards a community, to look towards an intervention. And my gut is that your structured external interventions do not work in these communities. The motivational interviewing or educational campaigns have all been tried and have failed. So there needs to be something different. And I've been trying to develop, or been looking to develop a CBPR intervention in these venues. So the issue, have trust. There are concerns around addiction, HIV, FAST, parenting. And these are core issues that we saw. FAST is fetal alcohol syndrome. There's very real HIV, very real alcohol addiction. HIV is a core problem. And parenting is a core problem. We saw a lot of parents sitting in the shebeens and their kids would come up and say, ask for money for food. Or ask when parents are coming home to make them supper. And the parents would give them like 10 rand to go and buy bread. It's good to eat. So there are a lot of core problems that are happening. There's violence, including interpersonal violence, high levels of gender violence, sexual violence. And then it was the police at that stage were regularly targeting these shebeens and trying to close them down. And there were gangs have been entering these communities more and more. And particularly around the distribution of methamphetamines, tik and unga or heroin, the two rising drugs in these communities. Some community members want all the shebeens removed, like all drinking venues removed. So you're sitting on the one side with people who want to drink and the shebeen owners versus the other side which want everything closed down. So we started thinking of approaches, and the one issue is looking at potential for using peer educators. So pulling in some of those who do drink at the venue and training them in key issues around education, around violence and HIV, and having them go back in, and around FAST. And I have developed a proposal which I'll be submitting to a local grouping around using peer educators around fetal alcohol syndrome. Education of owners, again particularly around fetal alcohol syndrome, to try and make sure they don't sell alcohol to women who are pregnant. But also just generally around providing protection to women who are in the venues. And then we're trying to develop this into an intervention and a funding proposal. To target populations, shebeen owners, there's variable interest, particularly amongst those those in the smaller venues, the illegal venues, do have quite a strong interest and they know their customers. Those in the large, but they are rapidly being closed down by the police, and there's a strong effort from the city to close them down. The alternative is, and then there's the larger legal venues where owners have got very little real interest in their customers. If one customer dies or is injured, there are plenty of other customers to come in and replace them. But they are also at some level, and they were supportive of the work that we did initially, so it might be possible to draw them in. The customers are interested in interventions, they want to do it, but they're very disempowered. Addiction, poverty, lack of education, very real trauma and loss of hope, particularly in some of them. But we did not apply participatory tools, and we might still be able to go back and work with them around these issues. But would probably, on reflection, would more likely have to be a combined program. Some of the community policing forums with the shebeen owners and with some of the customers working together. And that'll be a real cauldron. And then the tech users in the community, which is another area, and just in the process of hopefully developing a CBPR program to work around tech and unga use in the communities. Okay, wasn't much left on that one.